Welcome everyone. As everyone's kind of coming into our Zoom room here, I'm gonna let everyone get settled in before we start. Make sure everyone gets their screen adjusted and everyone gets comfy. This is always the best part of the presentation, you guys, where you just hear my very zen-like voice as we're waiting. All right, I'm going to give it a few more seconds before I let us get started here. Oh, people are still coming in. I love it. All right. Well, as some people are kind of rolling into our amazing room here, I'm going to give my introduction so we don't keep you from what you came here for, because it was not me. Anyway, I do want to welcome everyone here for National Services Presents. It is a program that we've been doing since the beginning of January. It's something we used to do with the branches, but we've shifted it to our online world thanks to a small thing like COVID-19 that we've been experiencing. So we've been doing this every other Tuesday night around 6 p.m. We started it, I believe it was the 5th of January, and we'll be running them through the end of April. So I think it's April 27th. And I can't believe we're already halfway through this wonderful presentation. As everyone is settling in, oh, well, guys, my technology failed me, so we're going to just go with it. I do want to remind everyone that we are in a Zoom webinar. So as you have the wonderful presenter, who is Meryl today, going through his amazing presentation, if you have questions, feel free to ask in the chat. The chat button is down below on your screen there. When you click on it, you're gonna see a little button that says to, and you can either go to the panelists, or if you want everyone who's attending here to also see your great question or your remarks, you can make sure it's sent to all panelists and attendees, which is all of us here. Today's program is being recorded. That is very, very exciting to us. And it's going to be on the BPL YouTube page. It's not happening immediately after this presentation. I do have to upload it up there. But within the next couple weeks, if you go to the BPL YouTube page, you will see our past presentations that have been recorded today. Below as well, there is closed captionings. If you are enjoying them, feel free to keep them on. If you are someone who wants to hide them, you can click on the CC Live transcript button below, and you can say hide subtitles, so then they will not show up for you anymore. I'm trying to think. I believe that might be all of, oh, no, one more thing. At the end of this presentation, a survey will pop up. And I know not everyone wants to do these surveys anymore, but it's really important to us and patron feedback. I can't read your mind. So if there are things that we're doing well, or comments that you have, or things that we can do in the future, please respond. I know you're like, hey, who reads these things? I do. I have been in my house for a year, and I love reading these things because I want to provide programs for you wonderful people. Okay, I'm trying to think. I think that's all we have. And as you guys know, I do love to ramble. So I'm going to pass it off to Ranger Meryl, who's going to talk about Lucy Stone, Make the World a Better Place. Take it away, Meryl.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Karen. And I'm going to see right now about sharing my screen here. And I need to hit and let's see what's going on. For some reason.
It started at the end for some reason.
Yes.
Meryl, if you just want to hit from beginning. Oh, there
Ah,
you go.
there we are. Sorry about that. As you can tell, I'm a little older than the technology, and sometimes it takes me a few minutes to catch up. But good evening, everyone. And I want to begin by acknowledging the Massachusetts tribe, the indigenous people from whom the province, colony, and Commonwealth of Massachusetts have taken their name. And I would like to pay my respect to the ancestral bloodline of the Massachusetts people and their descendants who still inhabit historical Massachusetts territories to this day. And I'd also like to acknowledge the obvious fact that I am a man talking about woman's history. And I do so tonight to honor Lucy Stone and all the other women, known and unknown, who have shaped the nation and the liberties that we now enjoy. And I hope that their stories will help inspire all of us to continue the struggle that they have so bravely and nobly carried on. So, this woman, this Lucy Stone, contemporary admirers described her as a short, quote, Quakerly looking woman who was unshrinking and self possessed as a loaded cannon. Abolitionist Thomas Wentworth Higginson declared, Lucy is the queen of us all and delights the whole country. Contrarily, the New York Times sniffed that men might feel less admiration for women if more of them were like Lucy Stone. Lucy Stone's daughter, Alice Stone Blackwell, reported that her mother's last coherent words were, make the world a better place. And as I share the stories of Lucy Stone's fight to make her world better, I invite you to consider those last words. Where do you think we can and should make our world a better place? How do you think we can and should go about it? So, Lucy Stone was born in West Brookfield, Massachusetts, which is just outside of Worcester, on August 13, 1818. She was born into advantages and opportunities most people in 19th century America simply did not have. Her parents were well established and respected white farmers. They were progressive, abolitionist, well educated, and devoted to learning and reading. But she was also born into restrictions and obstacles. When Lucy Stone was born, her mother is said to have cried out, oh dear, I am sorry it is a girl. A woman's life is so hard. Even comfortably middle-class white women faced enormous disadvantages in 19th century America. American society believed God had ordained the domestic sphere, that is, making a home, raising children, helping and obeying fathers and husbands, for women. Men were made for the public sphere, business, work, voting, government. Women couldn't vote or hold office. They should not speak in public. The essayist Charles Lamb even wrote, the woman who lets herself be known as an author invites disrespect. And as for work, well, respectable unmarried women were allowed to teach school, often for half the pay men got. Respectable married women were supposed to retire to domestic life and genteel volunteer activity. Now, women were taught often to read and write, usually in order to better fulfill their domestic duties. But education beyond those 3 R's of reading, writing, and arithmetic was often considered harmful to women and dangerous to society. No college in the United States admitted women. No free public high school in the United States admitted women. There were some progressive female seminaries, such as this Troy Female Seminary, better known today as the Emma Willard School in Troy, New York, which offered further education to women who could afford it. But not even these schools offered women an education equal to that of men. And these disadvantages continued after marriage. You can see in this brochure how Emma Willard, the actual founder of the school, the famous educator, becomes Mrs. John H. Willard and gets listed after her husband as the principals of the school. A married woman's property and earnings usually belong to her husband. Her husband had control of their children. He could even leave them to someone else in his will. A married woman could not make a contract. She could not make a will without her husband's consent unless she left everything to her husband. In many states, although not in Massachusetts, it was legal and accepted for a man, a husband, to physically correct his wife and children. And there were also over 1.5 million people, about 16% of the total population, who were enslaved in the United States. And this was Lucy Stone's world. Now, some women were already attacking that world. Sarah and Angelina Grimke, you see here, were born into a slave-owning family in Charleston, South Carolina. They broke away from that world to become radical abolitionists. In 1837, they made a lecture tour across the Northeast United States, speaking to, in the language of the time, promiscuous gatherings of men and women, often in churches. And they managed to outrage and threaten many men, especially clergymen, and a good number of women as well. In 1837, the General Association of Congregational Ministers of Massachusetts gathered in this First Congregational Church of West Brookfield, Massachusetts, to unveil a pastoral letter that was to be read in all Massachusetts congregational churches. The building then looked much like it does today. So you can kind of picture it. In Lucy Stone's words from later on, the body of this church was black with ministers, with the laymen and women filling the balcony, and one minister in his black pulpit gown stood up to read. Now you can read the full text of this very long letter online if you wish, but these selections pretty much sum it up. We invite your attention to the dangers which at present seem to threaten the female character with widespread and permanent injury. The power of woman is in her dependence. We cannot, therefore, but regret the mistaken conduct of those who encourage females to bear an obtrusive and ostentatious part in measures of reform, and countenance any of that sex who so far forget themselves as to itinerate in the character of public lecturers and teachers. Years later, talking to the Woman's Journal, Lucy Stone remembered that she, quote, at each aggravating sentence, nudged her cousin, who said afterwards that her side was black and blue. I was young enough then so that my indignation blazed, said Mrs. Stone, and I told my cousin that if I ever had anything to say in public, I should say it, and all the more because of that pastoral letter. Good clue into Lucy Stone's character. Lucy Stone was already determined to change her world. She'd already had a better education than most American women of her time. She was highly literate. She'd even taught herself to read Greek and Hebrew because she wished to read the Bible for herself and not to have to rely on any man to tell her what it said. She'd attended the Mount Holyoke Female Seminary, today Mount Holyoke College. She had been teaching school since she was 16, but she also saw, and even years later, deeply felt the limitations of that woman's education. In 1851, the Women's Rights Convention, she spoke. We read in the newspapers, we are taught at the fireside and at the female seminary that we must seek to obtain the graces and accomplishments which will make her better pleasing to the men. My soul loathes such meanness with perfect loathing. If there were no being in the world for her to influence, I would, for the sake of her own deathless nature, insist that for herself alone, woman should receive the highest mental cultivation of which she is capable. Lucy Stone wanted more. By August of 1843, she had saved up enough money to enroll in Oberlin College here in Ohio. Oberlin was one of the few American colleges at that time to grant women the same education and degrees as men, and also to enroll students of color. And Lucy flourished there. In 1847, she became the first Massachusetts woman ever to earn a college degree. And when she returned to Oberlin years later, people told her, you know, Lucy, we all loved you here. But Lucy's friend and later sister-in-law, Antoinette Brown, always remembered how an Oberlin trustee warned her to beware of Lucy Stone. Stone was, he said, a very bright girl, but eccentric and much too talkative on the subject of women's rights. He advised me not to become intimate, that is, friendly, with her. Antoinette Brown immediately determined for herself that she must meet this Lucy Stone, and they became lifelong friends and disturbers of the nation's peace. Lucy Stone certainly disturbed the peace of Oberlin, just one of several examples. In February of 1845, she was teaching in the school that Oberlin ran for freedom seekers, that is, fugitives from slavery in the town. She discovered that she was being paid half of what the male teachers, many of them with less experience, were getting paid. When she asked school officials for equal pay, they refused. Lucy Stone went on strike in protest. Her students actually offered out of their own pocket to pay the extra money. But Lucy Stone told them it was a matter of principle. 7 years later, Marianne Finch, visiting Oberlin, heard students then still talk about how she made the case that there was no reason, based on justice or common sense, why the same service equally well performed should not have the same compensation. And she continued her strike until May, when the school backed down. In this case, at least, women would be paid an equal salary for equal work. So after graduating from college, Lucy Stone declared that she was going to make a career as a public lecturer. Not all her family was happy about that. One sister actually asked her to please never lecture in Massachusetts. Public speaking by women, the sister said, was wholly contrary to divine teaching. Lucy replied, you would not object or think it wrong for a man to plead the cause of the suffering and the outcast. And surely the moral character of the act is not changed because it is done by a woman. There are no trials so great as they suffer who neglect or refuse to do what they believe is their duty. I expect to plead not for the slave only, but for suffering humanity everywhere. Especially do I mean to labor for the elevation of my sex. Now, her brother Bowman, although himself a congregational minister, did support her. As a matter of fact, Lucy Stone gave her first public lecture on women's rights in 1847. So that is a year before the first gathering at Seneca Falls, from the pulpit of Bowman Stone's church in Gardner, Massachusetts. And a year later, the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society hired her as a lecturing agent, and she was an instant success. Listeners said her voice was musical and carrying. One listener said no more perfect instrument had ever been bestowed on a speaker. But even her allies came up against that loaded cannon of her self-possession. When some abolitionists asked her to stop including women's issues in her speeches, she replied, "I was a woman before I was an abolitionist. I must speak for the women." And it could be a dangerous career. Again, one of many examples. Years later, she still remembered an 1848 anti-slavery meeting on Cape Cod when an angry pro-slavery mob attacked the stage. In her account, she turned to Stephen S. Foster, who was with her, and said, "You had better run, Stephen, they are coming." "But Lucy, who will take care of you?" She turned to one of the ringleaders who had just jumped up on stage holding a club. "This gentleman will." The man suddenly calmed down and said he would. Taking her arm with one hand, holding the club with the other, he started to lead her out through the crowd. On the way, she talked to him, and presently he mounted her up on a stump and stood by her with his club while she addressed the mob. And she made them so ashamed of themselves that they not only desisted from further violence, but took up a collection of $20 on the spot to pay Mr. Foster for his coat damaged in the melee. So Lucy Stone survived this and other dangers and assaults. Her parents and sisters even began to take pride in her lectures, but others still found her outrageous and even unchristian. West Brookfield, June 16, 1851. Miss Stone, it becomes my duty to inform you that the church, holden June 13, passed the following resolution. Whereas Miss Lucy Stone has withdrawn from the communion of this church and has engaged in a course of life evidently inconsistent with her covenant engagements to this church, voted that she no longer be a member with us. L. Sampson, clerk. She replied, West Brookfield, Massachusetts, June 20, 1851. Deacon Sampson, yours is the first intimation I have received from any source that either the church or any member of it was dissatisfied with my course. I should be glad of an opportunity to tell the church the reasons for my withdrawal from its communion, and also to show that my course of life is not only not inconsistent with, but demanded by my covenant engagements. The church never replied. She continued in her course of life, and that course of life could be very solitary. In 1849, Lucy Stone wrote to her friend Antoinette Brown, "It seems to me that no man who deserved the name of man, when he knows what a mere thing the law makes a married woman, would ever insult a woman by asking her to marry. It is horrid to live without the intimate companionship and gentle, loving influences which are the constant attendant of a true love marriage. It is a wretchedly unnatural way of living. But nothing is so bad as to be made a thing as every woman, married woman now is in the eye of law. Nettie, let us get down these laws and then marry if we can. Then Henry Brown Blackwell, you see here, came courting. It took him almost 2 years, but his persistent assertions that she would always be an equal partner in their union won her over. They were married on May 1st, 1855. As part of their marriage ceremony, they read out loud and signed this protest of the marriage laws of the time. And I really love this last part. We believe that personal independence and equal human rights can never be forfeited except for crime. That marriage should be an equal and permanent partnership and so recognized by law, that until it is so recognized, married partners should provide against the radical injustice of present laws by every means in their power. That protest was printed in newspapers across the country. It inspired other couples to follow suit with their own protests. And Lucy Stone made news again when she declared that she would remain Mrs. Lucy Stone, as far as we know, the first American woman ever to retain her birth name after marriage. Now, this witness cost her a chance to vote for school committee in Boston in 1879. And I have to say, Henry was not always the best of husbands. But the marriage and the equality grew stronger over the years. Just after Lucy's death, Henry wrote, "In behalf of the great principle of equality in marriage, I desire, in this hour of inexpressible bereavement, to say with all the added emphasis of a lifetime's experience, that the protest read and signed by Lucy Stone and myself on the first day of May, 1855, as a part of our nuptial ceremony, has been the keynote of more than 38 happy years. How happy, I today more keenly realize than ever before. In her behalf and on my own, I wish to reaffirm that declaration." And Lucy Stone also engaged in public action. At the 1850 Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society meeting, Lucy Stone and others decided they needed more than just a few speeches for women. Lucy Stone remembered, "I went to William Lloyd Garrison and I said, 'We haven't any money or any friends. We don't know what to do, only that we are bound to have a convention.' And he said to me, 'There never was a movement that began so small and so poor as the anti-slavery movement, but it was rich in truth. And because it was, it has succeeded so far and it will succeed. Yours is just as true and it will succeed. Never be discouraged.'" The result of that was this public call, a convention, to consider the great question of women's rights, duties, and relations, and the men and women of our country who feel sufficient interest in the subject to give an earnest thought and effective effort to its rightful adjustment are invited to meet each other in free conference at the time and place appointed. So they set up committees, began to write to all their contacts. And on October 23rd, 1850, 1,000 people, men and women, black and white, from at least 11 states, packed this Brinley Hall in Worcester, Massachusetts, and the same number returned the second day, while more, unable to fit inside, stood outside and listened. The convention's first resolution set the tone. Resolved that we will not cease our earnest endeavors to secure for women political, legal, and social equality with man, until her proper sphere is determined by what alone should determine it, her powers and capacities, strengthened and refined by an education in accordance with her nature. Lucy Stone, still recovering from typhoid fever, did speak on the second day, a speech in which she called upon women to take the rights they could now and demand the rights that they could not yet take. So those conventions continued until the Civil War, but Lucy Stone's active involvement ended earlier. September 14, 1857, she gave birth to her daughter, Alice. Alice was a sickly child in her early years. Lucy Stone's work involved much travel and time away. After trying to balance family and public life, she made the difficult decision to give herself to family. In one response to an invitation to speak, she wrote, "If our society was so arranged as to allow women to carry out both the domestic and public duties, I would happily accept. Until that day, I must respectfully decline." She withdrew from most public work for 6 years. Some accepted her decision. Her friend, Susan B. Anthony, scolded her for it. "A woman," she wrote, "who is and must of necessity continue for the present at least the representative woman, has no right to thus disqualify herself for such a representative occasion." And I will leave it to you to decide who was right, Lucy Stone or Susan Anthony. Now, she did not entirely cease her public witness. At that 1852 Women's Rights Convention, Lucy Stone had urged upon woman the duty of resisting taxation so long as she is not represented. "One such resistance," she said, "by the agitation that would grow out of it, will do more to set this question right than all the conventions in the world. The right of suffrage will be secured to us when we ourselves are willing to incur the odium and loss of property which resistance to this outrage on our rights will surely bring with it." And she lived those words as well as spoke them. In 1858, she received her first ever personal tax bill. She returned it. "Sir, enclosed, I returned my tax bill without paying it. My reason for doing so is that women suffer taxation and yet have no representation, which is not only unjust to one half the adult population, but contrary to our theory of government." She said that she wished to call men's attention to the wide difference between their theory of government and its practice. The county auctioned off that property. Some women and men, Stephen S. Foster especially, followed her into this law-breaking tax resistance. And others agreed with the New York Times that Lucy Stone was bringing womanhood into disrespect. So Lucy Stone returned to public life near the end of the Civil War. She celebrated the 13th Amendment ending slavery in 1865. She celebrated with ambivalence when the 14th Amendment guaranteed citizenship and due process, but also inserted the word male into the Constitution for the first time ever. And she and many other abolitionist women felt insulted and abandoned when the proposed 15th Amendment gave the vote to men, but nothing to women. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony led some women to reject the amendment unless it included women and to leave the American Equal Rights Association. Frederick Douglass, William Lloyd Garrison, Abby Kelly Foster, and others argued that it was necessary to take manhood suffrage while it was still being offered and then to work for women. Lucy Stone reluctantly decided to side with Douglas, Garrison, and Foster. The result was the end of the American Equal Rights Association, the end of her friendship with Stanton and Anthony, and the creation of two competing women's organizations. Stanton and Anthony based their National Women's Suffrage Association, you see here, in New York. Lucy Stone and her allies set up the American Women's Suffrage Association in Boston. Lucy Stone edited and published the AWSA's journal, the Woman's Journal, for most of the rest of her life. Historians are still debating the wisdom of that decision. One thing it did help lead to was this New England Woman's Tea Party, held on December 15, 1873, one day before the 100th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party. You can see here the women of New England who believed that taxation without representation is tyranny called upon all like-minded men and women to meet in Faneuil Hall on that day. According to the Woman's Journal, over 3,000 people filled the Great Hall of Faneuil Hall. Lucy Stone, in her speech, declared, "If we can make it keenly felt and clearly understood here and now that the taxation of women without representation is as great an injustice as is that done to men in the olden time, this day will be worthy to be held in grateful remembrance by our children's children forever." She finished her speech with a fiery call to protest the upcoming celebration of the American centennial. "Sisters," she said, "if our status does not change by 1876, if we are still held below the level of convicted felons, traitors, etc., stay home, draw the curtains, lock the doors, send a few of your older respected women in every community to stand outside with black banners saying in red letters, 'We are taxed, we have no representation. We are governed without our consent. We are fined, imprisoned, and hung with no jury trial by our peers. We have no legal right to our children, nor power to sell our land, nor will our money.' And when the boys at their idle play run up and ask, the women can say, 'We are mourning our freedom. We are taxed, yet we are not represented. Go toll the bells for freedom.' And the boys can then gain their first lesson in equal rights, while the men, if they do not change, can have their celebration as they now have their government all to themselves." Imagine what would have happened for those of you who remember 1976 if someone had stood up and given that speech then, or gave it in 2026 as we approach the 250th anniversary. As you can see back then, Harper's Weekly and other props of respectable society were not amused. The woman pouring the tea out is meant to be Lucy Stone, and I believe the man behind her in woman's clothing is meant to be Henry Brown Blackwell. However, suffragists were reinvigorated by the event to face down the ridicule and continue the struggle. Not all outcomes were so positive. Stanton and Anthony, after the split, turned to the wealthy and deeply racist George Francis Train and the, at that time, equally racist Democratic Party for funding and support. A little bit before the split, Henry Blackwell wrote this, "What the South Can Do," in which he called upon Southern legislatures to support women's suffrage because, and I quote, "Your 4 millions of Southern white women will counterbalance your 4 millions of Negro men and women, and thus the political supremacy of your white race. will remain unchanged. And I do have to say, I'm not aware that Lucy Stone ever disavowed her husband's words. Both sides introduced a thread of racism and segregation that would taint the women's movement for decades to come. I'll allow you to decide whether they still have an effect on us today. Now, that wrong must be acknowledged, but it isn't the whole picture. The American Women's Suffrage Association did have Black members, including Frederick Douglass, who spoke at that New England Women's Tea Party. And in 1893, the Boston Women's Era Club, which was an association of Black women activists just started by Georgina St. Pierre Ruffin and others, invited Lucy Stone to address their very first meeting. Now, Lucy Stone's health was failing. The meeting room in downtown Boston was stifling hot, while Lucy Stone's home on Pope's Hill in Dorchester was still cool and breezy. But Lucy Stone still came down to speak to the Black women whom other suffragists, many of them, had no time for. It was the last speech she ever gave in Boston. She died of stomach cancer just a few months later. The Women's Era Club wrote then, "Let her fragrant memory be kept alive as a quickening force for all women who feel the responsibility of the part they must play in the coming regeneration of the world." So in her life, Lucy Stone helped bring about an end to slavery, liberal property laws for married women, professions such as the ministry and the law open to women, some at least, women regularly speaking in public, colleges allowing women students, women at least allowed to vote on school questions in 20 states, and some states even allowing women to vote. And 20 years after her death, on August 18, 1920, Alice Stone Blackwell and other women across the country became empowered to hang signs like these in their windows. So, having heard these stories of how Lucy Stone and her contemporaries helped make their world a better place, where do you think our world today can and should be made better? And how do you think we can and should go about doing that? I can think of no better way to honor her memory than to answer and act upon those questions for ourselves. So I do have a list of resources if you wish to further study Lucy Stone and her life. Um, I will be happy. I know probably you don't have time to write them down today, but I will be happy to send this list to anybody who asks. All of these are easily available in libraries, several of them still in print. The biography by Alice Stone Blackwell, the Sally McMillan biography, are both in print. And the Woman's Journal is easily available, every single issue of it, at that website to be read. So on that note, I want to thank you. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and actually turn it over to Sean. We have about, about 10, 15 minutes to see if there are any questions. And if you don't mind, Sean, I see there's one right in front of me right now. Do you mind if I start by answering that? What became of her daughter? Alice is an interesting story. In some ways, kind of sad. She was a brilliant woman. She went to college, I believe, to Boston University. She learned to speak Russian, French, Armenian. She was one of the early Americans to publicize the genocide of Armenians in the Middle East at the Ottoman Empire. Tragically, she appears to have been engaged to a young Armenian man who died in that genocide. She never married. She translated poetry from Russian and from Armenian into English. She was in 1920 here in Boston in Faneuil Hall, one of the first speakers at the celebration of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. Sadly, she also later in life lost her sight. She became poverty stricken, although her neighbors in Cambridge apparently loved her so much that they helped support her for the rest of her life. And I believe she is buried, I think, in Mount Auburn Cemetery. Lucy Stone and Henry Brown Blackwell are buried in Forest Hill Cemetery in Jamaica Plain, which is worth visiting if you like rabble rousers. Dr. Joseph Warren is also buried there, as are William Lloyd Garrison and Helen Benson Garrison. I should say, by the way, buried is perhaps not quite the right word, because Lucy Stone is, I believe, also the first American woman ever to be cremated. Thank you very much, Gretchen Grosier. She is at Forest Hill Cemetery. Alice Stone Blackwell is also with her parents. So I hope that answers the question okay. Sean, are there any more questions or comments to respond to?
Yeah, we got a couple. So there are two that I think are pretty easy answers, and then one that is going to be a little bit more detailed. So I'll go with the two easier ones first. And then again, if anybody has any additional questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We do have a little bit of time here. So first, wanted to ask is, where are we here? There we go. Does Lucy Stone's Pope's Hill home still stand in Dorchester?
It does not. It was left by Alice to the Home for Little Wanderers. And they eventually, as property prices went up, it was a large home on acres of farmland to help support their programs, sold it off, and it was torn down and the land was developed into smaller properties. There is, I believe, a marker up there today to show where it was.
Great, thanks, Merrill. So next question, would Lucy have been related to Elizabeth Blackwell, the first woman to receive a medical degree?
Yes. So, and I saw someone pointed it out. Elizabeth Blackwell was Henry Brown Blackwell's sister. And as a matter of fact, she graduated from Geneva Medical College in Geneva, New York, which was, it no longer exists, but it was affiliated with Hobart and William Smith colleges in Geneva, New York, which just happened, Hobart just happens to be my alma mater. So I have a connection there as well. Not only, by the way, was Henry's sister Elizabeth the first American woman to graduate from medical college, but another sister, Emily Blackwell, was the third American woman to ever graduate. So even before he met Lucy Stone, he already had some experience of formidable women. And that may have helped, although the two sisters, frankly, it took Lucy a long time to convince them that she was good enough for their brother Henry.
Thanks, Merrill. So now we got the next one here. So did Lucy Stone have like a social circle of allies and friends, or did she suffer from loneliness as a result of being singled out as different and audacious in comparison with other women of her class, religion, privilege? If lonely, how did she deal?
The answer to that question is sort of yes, on both sides. She did actually have a circle of good friends. Antoinette Brown, who became Antoinette Brown Blackwell. She married one of Henry's brothers, was a lifelong very, very close friend of hers. And by the way, Antoinette Brown was the first woman in this country ever ordained as a minister by a major American church denomination, by the Congregational churches, although she became a Unitarian. Um, so that and others, uh, until the split in 1870, Susan B. Anthony was a good friend. And as a matter of fact, it was one of Lucy Stone's speeches at, I think it was the 1851 convention, that inspired Susan B. Anthony to become involved in the women's movement. Frederick Douglass, the Garrisons were very close friends for her entire life. On the other hand, she was also a woman who was set aside, who was regularly insulted. People accused her, because she didn't change her name, of living in sin, of not being properly married, and shunned her for that. And then the split in 1870 was a truly painful and vicious one. And the truth is, Susan B. Anthony and Lucy Stone never regained their friendship. One of the reasons why Lucy Stone is much less known today than Stanton and Anthony is when they wrote their history of the women's movement in 19th century America, they actually did ask Lucy Stone to contribute something. She believed, and probably with good reason, that they would not give her a fair hearing. And so she got written out of that history entirely. So that's why I said yes to both. And I think in some ways she coped with it by the belief in that what she was doing was right, that she was doing her duty, as she had said so many years earlier, and also by writing and acting.
Great. So that actually, you answered another question about why Lucy Stone was not as well remembered today. So that's good. Killing two birds with one stone there. So another question: does Stone's daughter's activism for Armenian rights have anything to do with encouraging Armenian settlement in Watertown? Now, this is obviously a specific question, so if you don't know the answer, that's totally fine. But figured I'd throw it out there and see if you know.
And I don't know. And it you know, of course, it could act in reverse, that she met Armenians in Watertown and heard from them the stories, of the genocide, which, remember, not just the Ottoman government, the Turkish government, it was the Young Turks that were at the change there, but the United States government wanted to suppress the truth that was coming out there, and did for a long time, including the refusal. And here I'm going to make a political statement, and this is not a statement of the National Park Service or anything else, but the refusal to use the term genocide to refer to what happened to Armenians in the Middle East. So there's a slightly more extended, but still, in the end, I don't know answer.
Okay, so I think we have, there were a lot of great questions in the chat, and I do appreciate them. I think we have time for about one more question. So I wanted to ask you, Meryl, and again, obviously kind of wanting to strike the balance of, looking at, Lucy Stone and obviously not wanting to project anything. The question is twofold. So the first is, based on Lucy Stone's principles, what issues do you imagine she would take on today? Obviously, don't as a representative of the Park Service, not wanting to wade into too current issues. So I think, that's kind of going back to the question that you asked the folks in the chat. But, the second part of the question, what strategies do you imagine that she might put to use, based upon kind of her activism and, looking at, what tools she might have available to her today? So again, based on Lucy Stone's principles, what issues do you imagine she would take on today? What strategies do you imagine she might put to use?
Yeah, I think in some ways she'd at least be connected to the Black Lives Matter movement. Equal pay for equal work, appropriate childcare and education. I think all of those she would be very much involved in there. So those are some of the issues. Probably if I gave it more thought, I could come up with a lot more. Her way, her methods. Keep in mind that she really was more or less a Garrisonian abolitionist. I'm not sure. I haven't read enough to know whether she was like Garrison tried to be a pacifist, but definitely her methods were protest, organization, not just solitary protest, but bringing people together into organizations that will carry on, that will organize, petition, boycott. I think probably would be a fair thing. Today, not something that was likely to happen back then, but today, run for government office and keep that those great words of Frederick Douglass near the end of his life, when he was asked what by a young man what he should do: agitate, agitate, agitate.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I could also see her being a very active user on Twitter. So I think with that, turn it back over to Karen. And again, thank you all very much for the wonderful questions, and Meryl, obviously, for the phenomenal presentation.
Well, thank you all so much. Great questions, great conversation. The only thing I wish is that I could see all of your faces while I was talking to you. And hopefully someday, not too far in the distant future, we'll have a chance to do that. So thank you all very much. And thank you, Karen, for inviting me.
Of course. Thank you so much for coming, Meryl. Oh, I love this so much. I learned so much about Lucy Stone, and also I found it fascinating that she was kind of written out of the history. That I was like, wow. So I know I'm definitely going to do more digging because I'm just pinging with excitement. I know of a great library, guys, that you might be able to do some digging as well. If you are interested, you can go to bpl.org and look up some wonderful more Lucy Stone information. You can also email ask@bpl.org. That is ask@bpl.org. If you have any questions for the National Park Services, for anyone, really, I can forward it along or try and answer it myself as well. So we really, really thank you. Please check out the National Park Service webpage as well. They do wonderful programs, not just the ones here. And actually, in 2 weeks from now, they are coming back for the next talk, which is Equal to the Occasion: Boston's Women and the Underground Railroad. I love Women's History Month, as you can tell. So please have a wonderful evening, and thank you so much for being here. Have a great day, everyone.